Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So maybe how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear.
Push me down, Josh.
Koala bear.
Push me down, Josh.
Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, great, Barry, a reefer.
Hi, welcome back. It's the Koala podcast. All this hemp stuff going on in the US. I thought I'd better get on the phone to Rod. He's chilled out down in Mexico. He's pretty relaxed. He's out of the scene, but he's in the scene. I just thought I'd sort of get a feel from Rod. He's been doing quite a few posts on hemp recently, and obviously following all the regulatory updates, if you want to call them that, from around the various states and all the state houses, furiously writing up amendments and legislation to get rid of those evil hemp peddlers. Rod, thanks for coming on to the Karma again. Just wanted to just say hi and just get a sense from you. Since all this stuff has been happening, I think, and we spoke about 3 months ago, it's been a fairly steady stream of, legislators, regulators, anything with TORS saying hemp is bad. Lots of sort of cannabis industry propaganda against hemp because they're trying to protect themselves. But as you said in the preamble, some of them are now moving into the HHC arena. We've had 3 beverage launches in 10 days, I think, or something. But I mean, I presume you saw in California last week that new report, which when I looked into, it was a dodgy union connected to cannabis royalty and the normal money and power thing where everybody pretended they weren't connected to each other, but it really took just a cursory look to see that it was. And I think it's also the same week that the Wiener put up his latest piece of useless legislation. That man puts up a piece of legislation every sort of 3 weeks, and it never seems to get anywhere. So I just wanted to get a sense from you, what's happening, and in terms of business, how are your hemp clients feeling?
Yeah, well, I think generally everyone's feeling, cautiously optimistic and frankly pretty positive. We're in Mexico, but we're every day, on the phone with clients and talking to lobbyists and keeping up with all the bills. And so, we're in this strange place where I think it might be a little bit early to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. I think that the sort of monolithic, overbroad strokes are within the cannabis industry are really kind of fracturing now. And maybe to put it in a different way, it used to be sort of, the marijuana or cannabis industry and the hemp industry. And those are the two kind of monolithic. And then there was the Civil War thing and blah, blah, blah. But what we've seen is that, first of all, the hemp industry has continued to grow and expand throughout the country. On the other side of things, the marijuana cannabis industry, a huge proportion of our newer clients are those companies who are pivoting into expanding into the hemp side of things. And so, that we don't have those two big monoliths.
And is that why they're talking to you, is because they've got zero knowledge and they're thinking, shit, I need somebody to speak to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting because it's all the same plant, but it's completely different from marketing, regulations, of course, licensing, how to expand, how to deal with multiple states, international sales. I mean, so right, it really is a different beast to enter the hemp industry. And we've talked to a lot of really smart folks who are from the cannabis side who are bringing their knowledge, with them as well, and that's great. But even within the cannabis industry as a whole, and then maybe getting within the hemp industry, it's not monolithic either, because what you've got are a range of different sort of categories of products. You've got the edible, the THC and HHC and whatever edibles, and a lot of those are produced from chemically modifying CBD and other cannabinoids, and continues to be a raging debate. But there are other things that are going on as well. Of course, THCA flower, cannabis, generally speaking, is essentially legal right now in the United States. And that's not legal advice. There's plenty of states where THCA flower is illegal, and or so is marijuana flower. But it's in terms of, I mean, if you're in the United States and you pop up and say, want to get an e-com order of some flour to your house, I mean, there's a website for you. And that side of the industry is really moving. And then we've got the beverage industry, which is, we used to sort of classify that as, kind of among the edibles, but the beverage industry is really kind of moving in its own direction. And there are bills that are tailored specifically for beverages, and I think everyone sort of agrees that regardless of what happens in the next bill, if and when we ever get another farm bill, and regardless of what happens in state X, Y, or Z, that the beverage category has gotten enough traction, and it's also paired up in a lot of cases with the alcohol industry, that it's going to survive. But I think that it's all going to survive. I mean, I think what we're realizing is it's all the same plant, it's all the same cannabinoids. The cannabis marijuana sector emerged in such a way that it's now just overly burdened with taxes and regulations and permits and jurisdictional walls. You can't go from state to state. On the other side, the hemp industry is pretty wide open, and so people see this as maybe a reset, a redo, an opportunity to do it right. And I'm not sitting here saying that the hemp industry is doing everything right. It's a new industry, and there are some things that need to be done just to ensure safety and fairness and all that type of stuff that we could talk about or not. But the bottom line is, I guess, just to wrap up this little soliloquy of mine, is that we're not seeing this as cannabis versus hemp. We're not seeing this as really anything other than an evolution is occurring, and everyone in the hemp industry, and I think in the cannabis industry who's getting involved, is feeling pretty good about it.
So, I mean, but I get a sense that, the cannabis stroke hemp industry is always 3 years ahead of the thinking of the regulators and the legislators. And it's been very busy in a lot of houses around the country. Okay, I understand that some of these bills put up by GOP members, whether they be upper house or lower house statewide, are just sucking up to Trump and their ilk in Washington to try and look good, and nothing will actually go through. But it's interesting what you say about the beverage industry, and maybe you want to dig into that a bit more. Are you saying that specific amendments within existing legislation within state houses are saying that the beverage industry is exempt from certain rules about HHC? How's that working if it's growing? Because, sorry, I just want to throw in one more thing. I presume, and you know this better than me, the beverage industry started really showing its face, 2 years ago, with smaller companies. Now 3 or 4 of the majors have come in. Could you sort of fill in that picture on what that sector is looking like as it develops? I mean, is it going to end up being, the equivalent of a Coca-Cola, Pepsi, whoever owns Coors, because I don't know who owns these companies, or is it will a lot of the smaller companies, like craft related stuff, be existing alongside those bigger companies?
I think it's going to be a lot of consolidation for the next, 2 to 4 years. In the 5 to 10 year arc, I think we're going to see, some major brands, a handful that everyone knows, and then we're going to see the craft side. I think the beer analogy, in that respect, seems to be right. You've got your main Budweiser, Coors, whatever, but then you've got, a pretty solid set of craft breweries in the United States that are either regional or national, and they're not doing the sales that Budweiser is, but they're doing a really robust sales for that demographic. I have not seen, it won't surprise me if this comes into play, but I haven't seen the Pepsis and the Cokes and the non-alcoholic, major beverage companies getting involved yet, but I think that's just a matter of time. What we've seen is that alcohol companies, mostly beer distributors and manufacturers and whatnot, are seeing this, hemp, THC, beverage option as a way to frankly patch up their bottom lines. I don't know what's happening where you are, but in the United States, for sure, there's a lot, people are not drinking the way they used to.
No, well, I
And
mean, look,
alcohol companies see
look,
that.
I'm not actually not a drinker, but my son is Australian. He's always going out for a beer. But to be honest, when he says that, they're not drinking like we drank when we were young. Um,
Yeah, they're not. We've got 5 kids, and some of them drink, some of them don't, but they definitely don't drink like I did when I was
yeah,
when
well,
I was their age. I
exactly
don't
like
really
I
drink
did.
much anymore,
Yeah.
and a lot of my contemporaries are have stopped or slowed down drinking, and so this is really affecting the alcohol companies, and they're looking for an option, and I think they view, and I think rightfully so, these THC infused beverages as the path forward, and so as we move that into sort of legislative circles and what's happening with bills, it's not so much, it's hard to even explain, it's not a carve out so much, it's that some of the bills are really specific to beverages, period. Other bills make a big distinction between hemp products A, B, and C, and then beverages, and beverages
Mm.
are often treated completely differently in terms of who regulates them, how they can be sold, who can sell them. And in some respects, I think it's very smart and it's very helpful because it's, now we have some of the firepower of the alcohol companies and their deep lobbying connections and deep resources to kind of push forward and continue this evolution of hemp and cannabis in the United States. On the other side, some of the bills are pretty damn aggressive, and it's sort of like, the hell with all these other hemp products. We really don't care about them at all. We want only these hemp beverages to be the thing. And by the way, out of state companies can't do it. It's only certain distributors. I mean, we've seen in a few instances bills that are really aggressive and
So
very
they're trying to sort of
focused on
carve
helping
out
those
state
alcohol
monopolies.
companies. Yeah, yeah. It's sort of a pre-monopoly thing. So we're watching that as well. And how do you partner up? That's not the right word, but how do you sort of engage with these alcohol companies who in a lot of respects have a significantly different product history, in terms of alcohol versus cannabis, but different. It's a whole different route to market, and different priorities, and how do you work with that to promote the cannabis industry in a positive way, so it's not just a land grab by the alcohol companies, while also saying, hey, this is a potentially positive way
It's
to
funny,
move
isn't it? Because
forward.
I
So
think if we all thought 10 years ago, if the land grab was going to happen, it was going to be big tobacco. But actually, it's alcohol, isn't it?
that's so cool. We keep waiting for big tobacco to get
But
into the thing,
the
and
way people
I've heard,
consume it, I mean, look, I'm old school, so
yeah.
that's how I consume it. But the way,
Right, me too.
but
Yeah,
not, well, I have to say, not here in Indonesia. But I mean,
yeah, right.
uh, I, ha I think that the demographics, they don't consume it in that way anymore, really, do they?
Yeah, flour, it continues to be kind of the thing, right? But so many people don't use flour at all, and a beverage is a nice easy way to consume your cannabis. I mean, I like the cannabis beverages, and what we've seen, when I go back and spend time in North Carolina, which is where we're from, and we still have a place there, and go, there's just, every time we go into a restaurant or a bar, oh, it seems like, oh, not every time, a lot of times, oh, we can, well, among the drink options, whether it be coffee or sodas or beers or mixed drinks, oh, here's 1 to 3 THC infused options as well. Same in Texas. We spent some time in Texas recently, and that's just going to continue to expand. And
That's sort
so,
of quite
and
that's
it's
quite odd in a way, because people are spending all this time trying to draw up consumption legislation, but it's already happening right under their noses. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's happening right there. And so I think people, again, like to your point, think about, smoking weed, and that, that's an image, and that's a smell, and that's a whole thing. And consumption lounges, to be clear, are springing up in that respect as well. But that's very different. You don't need a dedicated consumption lounge for a cannabis beverage, because you can sit right there next to the person who's drinking a glass of wine, next to the person who's drinking a coffee, and it's all it's just a restaurant or a cafe or a bar or whatever.
And okay, here's a question, because obviously alcohol companies have to deal with this, and this is a really big issue in jurisdictions more so outside the states, which is driving and THC impairment. What do
Mhm.
they talk to you about how they manage that issue at all? And do they have warnings on their products, anything like that? Or they're not really worrying about that at the moment because the legislators and the regulators aren't sophisticated enough about it?
Well, I think you raised the regulatory, sophistication and keeping up issue, and I think I'd like to put a pin in that and talk about that a little bit more. But for the impairment, yeah, I mean, definitely there are warnings. We are routinely helping clients craft appropriate warnings for their products. But I think to get to the regulatory and law enforcement path, it's something that's either not being thought of, and when it is, the analogy is always to alcohol. And so you have the most ridiculous bills and laws where people, if they have a certain amount of a metabolite of THC in their blood, they're presumptively considered to be
Impaired is the
impaired. And
word
that
they love to use, isn't it?
they love to use that word, and the thing is that's not true. And not only is it such that someone could be crazy high with a fairly low amount of metabolite. Another person could have tons of metabolite because they use every day and not be high at all. And then that's not even speaking to the fact that unlike alcohol, different people respond differently to cannabis and cannabinoids. And so, really the issue, and I co-authored a paper on this a few years ago. The issue, unlike alcohol, should not be how much, THC or THC metabolite do you have in your blood, but how impaired are you, period. And there are ways to gauge that, which goes to, what amounts to very sophisticated field sobriety tests. It used to be back in the day, touch your finger to your nose and walk up. But nowadays there are electronic, iPad-y type things where you can have a baseline and then they can test impairment based on that. And so it's not even necessarily about cannabinoids or alcohol or prescription medications. Whatever it is that you're taking, if you're impaired, you shouldn't be driving. And we should be focused on tests and laws that speak to impairment, not proxies for impairment that may or may not be accurate. And then one last thing about the regulators, in my writings over the years, I realized that I tend to kind of beat up on the regulators, but I've had a lot of really good engagement with regulators in the past year or two. And I do sort of feel for them because things are moving so quickly. It's impossible to keep up on a regulatory standpoint right now. That doesn't give them a pass. This is their job. They need to stay on top of it. But I think that we're in a really exciting and time that's also kind of difficult, to keep up with the regulations. 20 years from now, it'll be different. But this is a heady time.
Now, we're talking about the regulations and the regulators around the states, which sort of leads to Washington, D.C., where,
Mhm.
essentially there's a shitstorm going on. And as you alluded to earlier, we have no idea what's happening with the Farm Bill. What do you think? I mean, now you've got some really big companies being involved. They've got a lot of money. They're very sophisticated about lobbying. Do you think hemp and cannabis will become a conversation again in DC in 26, maybe? I mean, it just seems it's almost impossible to gauge. It's just get on with it, everybody else. But essentially, everybody can only get on with it to a certain point. At some point, somebody, like I had this discussion with a politician who's been in drug reform in Australia for 30 years. And she's about to stand for the Cannabis Party to try and get into Canberra because Australia's at the same point, different way of doing it, but something has to be signed at the center so the states can get on and do it and do all those other things that states can do, like trade with one another, have standard tax
Mhm.
treaties, all this sort of stuff.
Right.
I mean, is there any sense of that happening in Washington? Will big players with lots of money make it happen?
I don't have a sense that there's much of a conversation right now going on. I mean, there's always conversations about every political issue you could ever
Of
imagine
course,
going on some
but
level, of course. But
it
so I'm
doesn't
not
mean
saying there
anything's
are
going
no
to,
conversations,
actually
but
taking it seriously, does it?
yeah, meaningful conversations about what's going to happen. I think you're right. It's impossible to know. I think those conversations and priorities are essentially paused right now at the federal level. whether they're going to pick back up. And I keep up with Farm Bill talks. I have a Google filter that sends me a long list of articles on the Farm Bill, and you'd be surprised. Literally every single day of the year, there's at least 15 and sometimes 40, or more articles on the Farm Bill. So I watch it, and it's a small percentage that ever reach hemp or anything at all. It's mostly about this, that, or the other thing that the Farm Bill covers. And what's happening now is that the conversation is about, benefits, certain types of SNAP benefits and things like that, and cuts to that the administration is making, and how the Republican Party, which is going to, dictate the outline of the next Farm Bill right now, of course, and how they're dealing internally with some of these cuts and priorities and whatnot. And I think it's a long road to get to any Farm Bill from where we are right now, much less sort of dealing with the hemp specific issues. So in a lot of ways, that feels positive because, once the next Farm Bill comes in, that's what we've got for the next 4 to, you know,
6
to 10 years. Who knows nowadays?
Who knows exactly?
And so, you want to get it right. And so it's kind of like, oh, as long as we've got the 2018 Farm Bill, it's all fine. Eventually we need something else. But it's also disconcerting because when things do pivot around and a Farm Bill looks like it's coming together, things are going to come together really quickly, I think. And so that's, I think it's important for the people that are focused to stay focused, even though the conversations aren't happening right now, in a big way. Keep that conversation going so we don't have the rug pulled out from underneath us whenever a Farm Bill does come together, whether that's later this year or 2 years from now or whenever we have it. One last comment on that. I will say that there's a big push right now politically in the United States, and I think it's definitely Republican focused, but I think it's Republican Democrat to have states regulate a lot of things, and in particular cannabis and hemp. And so this is probably not the right podcast for this. There's a lot of good arguments for that, some arguments against that. But I think that what we're ultimately going to see on the federal level is probably some level of, hey, let's leave it up to the states and let them which, there's some
Will that
pros
allow
on that.
them to do intrastate trade and international trade? Because those are to me, they seem to be the big two future issues that are holding the US industry back, while Canada mints it up north, flogging their weed
Mints
all
it
over
up
the
north,
world.
right? Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're looking at, right? I mean, if we're talking about marijuana cannabis, then no, I don't think we're getting anywhere anytime soon at all. On the hemp side of things, yeah, I mean, we have interstate trade, international trade with hemp right now. So the issue is not can it be done? It's more like if you're in, you've got 50 different states with 50 different rules, maybe 30 different labeling requirements. It's more how do you thread that needle as a company trying to do business in the States versus, can it be done? So, I think we're going to just continue to see more of an evolution of the states. Eventually, we're probably going to see some sort of a statutory construct that where it's a uniform statute that a lot of states adopt what amounts to the same laws, to get some consistency. But we're far from that right now.
I've only got 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one more question. I know you deal mainly with hemp for human consumption issues. What about industrial hemp? Are you seeing any progress on that in terms of like serious investment because it needs serious investment, doesn't it? And there's a lot of
It needs serious
opportunity with
investment.
it if somebody wants to throw money.
Yeah, I'm very personally involved and interested in hemp that's not for human or animal consumption. But the reality of the matter is those types of deals and things I just see very rarely. I'm always open to it. But to
It's
your
not such
point,
quick
I think
money, is it?
it's not quick money. It's a long play. There are nodes in the supply chain that are underdeveloped, that need development, and it just creates a massive amounts of of a resource drain at times. But no, we continue to see progress, and I think it's not dramatic progress that cover of a magazine. Not that anyone reads magazines anymore, but it's not headline news.
Yeah.
But I think we're just continuing to see incremental progress. So when we look up this time next year, this time 5 years from now, this time 10 years from now, we're going to see a demonstrable difference, but without any sort of major issue.
It'll crawl towards whatever level it needs to get to. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What's the phrase? slow and steady wins the race, you know. So
Yep.
I think we're going to see a global hemp, fiber et al, industry, but it's just going to take some time.
Okay, Rob. Well, we're almost out of time, so thank you very much for bringing me up to date on what's going on. It's actually, after talking to you, I always feel a bit more confident about the hemp side of things and how people, treating it more seriously than you would sometimes read in the daily rubbish that ends up on my desktop.
Well, it's always a pleasure talking with you, Sean, and I really appreciate all the good work you're doing in